Hello, Symposiast. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, Religious Studies PhD and University Lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. Today, I'm excited to embark with you on a journey to explore the Church of the SubGenius. What is the Church of the SubGenius? This fascinating and intentionally provocative invented religion that emerged in the late 20th century. At first glance, this group might seem like just a parody or an ongoing satirical performance. A playful mix of religious themes, corporate style, and countercultural vibes centered around the whimsical prophet named J.R. Bob Dobbs. However, in this episode, we'll see how the Church of the SubGenius presents a wonderfully rich case study for examining the blurry lines between religion and fiction, genuine belief and playful irony, and even between spirituality and consumerism. At the core of this examination lies a deceptively simple question: can a parody be sacred? This question is not rhetorical. It compels us to reconsider our assumptions about what religion is and how it functions, particularly in late modern Western societies increasingly characterized by religious individualism, secularity, and the commodification of spiritual expression. The Church of the SubGenius embodies precisely these conditions. It is not merely an eccentric footnote in the landscape of new religious movements, but a complex, multi-layered commentary on the very notion of religious authenticity. To begin unpacking this, we must place the Church of the SubGenius within the broader cultural and scholarly context of invented religions. According to Carol Cusack, invented religions such as the Church of the SubGenius, Discordianism, and the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster are not just jokes or hoaxes, but serious cultural artifacts that blur the lines between fiction and belief. These movements are constructed deliberately as religions, but draw their symbolic material from pop culture, science fiction, and parody, often intentionally undermining traditional religious categories while simultaneously offering frameworks for identity, meaning-making, and community. In this light, the Church of the SubGenius is not only a parody of Christianity, televangelism, or corporate religion, it is also a mirror held up to postmodern spiritual longing. It reflects a desire for transcendence that is mediated through irony, humor, and media pastiche. Christopher Partridge has argued that movements like these are part of what he termed the reenchantment of the West, a process through which sacralization occurs outside the boundaries of traditional religion and within popular culture, counterculture, and what he calls occulture. This phenomenon represents a reconfiguration of the sacred, where symbolic systems that were once confined to the pulpit or the temple now emerge on comic book pages, underground signs, and internet forums. It is also important to note that many of these new movements are born from a milieu heavily influenced by psychedelia, alternative spirituality, and a critical stance towards mainstream religious and political systems. As Greer notes, the Church of the SubGenius should be understood within the broader psychedelic church movement, which includes a diverse range of esoteric and spiritual communities that utilize entheogenic experience, surrealist aesthetic, and countercultural critique as tools of spiritual expression and communal bonding. Although the Church of the SubGenius does not centrally ritualize psychedelics in the same way that, say, the Native American Church does with peyote, it nevertheless emerges from the same cultural and ideological milieu, one that values altered state of consciousness, satirical detachment, and the subversion of orthodoxy. Within this broader framework, parody becomes not simply mockery, but a method of religious innovation. As Cusack points out, parody in such contexts can function as an ironic hermeneutics, a way of navigating meaning through exaggeration and contradiction. It enables adherents to maintain critical distance from dogma while simultaneously engaging in ritual, myth, and metaphysical speculation. The figure of Bob Dobbs is not revered in spite of his absurdity, but because of it. He becomes a symbol through which the contradictions of religious authority, capitalist desire, and spiritual fulfillment are brought into full view. Slack, the Church's central soteriological concept, functions not only as a metaphor for liberation from work and societal expectation, but also as an emblem of countercultural resistance against neoliberalism's colonization of time and agency. Moreover, the Church of the Subgenius is a quintessential product of what Bron Taylor and others have identified as a shift toward nature-reverent and ecologically concerned spirituality. While the Church itself may not explicitly advocate for environmental ethics in the same way that eco-paganism or Gaian spirituality does, it shares with these movements a post-institutional sensibility and a rejection of transcendental moral binaries. The broader context provided in the Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature reminds us that spiritual movements today increasingly favor immanence, subjectivity, and personal experiential truth over inherited dogma. Even in its absurdist forms, such as the Church of the Subgenius, this shift can be discerned in the movement's rejection of hierarchy, its embrace of personal authenticity, even if satirically constructed, and its preference for direct, if chaotic, engagement with the mystery of existence. In summation, our approach to the Church of the Subgenius will be grounded not in the question of whether its members really believe, but in what this belief, performed through satire, bricolage, and ritual, tells us about contemporary religiosity. It is a challenge to the Academy to rethink the boundaries of the sacred, the serious and the sincere. As we move through the topics covered in this episode, I encourage you to hold in mind the idea that the Church of the Subgenius is not the opposite of religion, but one of its many postmodern mutations, emerging not despite secularization, but because of it. But before we dive heads deep, brains deep into this topic, I'd like to remind you that this project of delivering free academic scholarship based on peer-reviewed research on all things esoteric and occult can only exist thanks to your support. You are my fancy sponsor, so if you have the means, I would really appreciate it if you supported my work, joining my fantastic and growing Patreon community, sending donations on PayPal, Coffee. Also, you can check out my services at drangelapuca.com. And you can get tutoring sessions, commission a video, and much more. So definitely check that out. You can also take my courses. And there's a new one upcoming that I'm not going to mention for now, but it's going to be a live online course. So that would be a good reason to sign up for my newsletter because in my newsletter, subscribers and my patrons always get the first chance to sign up to any course that has limited spots. So my patrons come first, newsletter subscribers, and then I go public with the spaces that are left. So definitely check out my my Patreon and also sign up for my newsletter, which is free and keeps you in contact with me regardless of the social media algorithms. Also, you can super thank me in the comments. Yeah, thank you so much for considering. It is really thanks to you that this project of free online public education can exist. So thank you so much to those who have helped, are helping, and will help. And now back to our topic. To understand the emergence of the Church of the Subgenius, we must contextualize its genesis within the cultural matrix of late 20th century America, specifically the post-1960s counterculture and the broader psychedelic and esoteric revival that characterized this period. The church was officially founded in the late 1970s and gained prominence in the early 1980s, largely due to the efforts of Doug Smith, also known as Ivan Stang, and Steve Wilcox, alias of Philo Drummond. These founders crafted a complex and chaotic theology centered on the messianic figure of J.R. Bob Dobbs, a 1950s-style salesman prophet who functions as both satirical icon and mythical anchor for the church's doctrines. Their central claim that Bob received divine revelation from the space god Yahweh One in 1953 sets the tone for a movement that blends millenarian science fiction, commercial aesthetics, and absurdist critique. This founding narrative should not be read purely as a fabrication meant to entertain or deceive. Rather, it is part of what Cusack describes as fictional intentionality, in which belief systems are crafted through deliberate mutopoeia with the claim of constructing spiritual meaning and community. The narrative of Bob operates as a counter myth to mainstream religious hagiography, deliberately deploying corporate motifs to parody both televangelism and capitalist spirituality. In doing so, the Church mimics the structural and rhetorical devices of established religious movements: prophecy, revelation, salvation, only to subvert them through irony and satire. The historical emergence of the Church also coincided with the explosion of alternative religious experimentation in the United States. As Greer explains, the 1960s and 1970s witnessed the proliferation of psychedelicist ideologies that positioned chemical alteration of consciousness as a means to spiritual revelation. While the Church of the SubGenius does not promote psychedelics in the ritualized manner of groups like the Native American Church or Santo Daime, it nevertheless emerged from a cultural milieu in which altered states, chaos, and rebellion against mainstream rationality were considered legitimate spiritual pursuits. The satirical invocation of hallucinogenic apocalypse, the rapture expected on X day, when the faithful will be raptured by aliens, parodies both Christian eschatology and New Age millenarianism, while simultaneously participating in their mythic grammar. The specific cultural backdrop of the late 1970s and early 1980s America is also crucial. As Partridge documents, this was a period marked by increasing spiritual individualism, media saturation, and growing skepticism towards institutional religion. It was also a time when many were turning to fringe movements and experiential spirituality to construct alternative narratives of meaning in the face of what Max Weber had termed the disenchantment of the word. The Church of the SubGenius both reflected and amplified these conditions. Its founding text, the Book of the SubGenius from 1983, Revelation X, and High Weirdness by Mail, were not just vehicles of theological dissemination, but artifacts of a burgeoning occultural underground, circulated through zines, mail order catalogs, cassette tapes, and eventually early internet forums. The use of absurdity and humor, while seemingly flippant, served a strategic function in positioning the Church as a liminal space between the sacred and the profane. Eric Davis, in his contribution to the occult world, situates figures like Robert Alton Wilson and the SubGenius founders within a broader lineage of occultural thinkers who deliberately employ trickster figures, irony, and chaos to rupture conventional modes of thought and religious orthodoxy. In this view, the Church is less an atheistic spoof than a sophisticated critique of modern religiosity, performed through the symbolic economy of pop culture. The performative dimension is also visible in the Church's deployment of prophecy and apocalypse. X Day, first declared to occur on July 5, 1998, is said to be the moment where the true subgenii will be rescued by the alien space fleet of the sex goddesses, while the normals or pinks will be obliterated. Of course, the day came and went without incident and has continued to be celebrated annually ever since. This absurd eschatology functions as an ironic mirror of millenarian anticipation, mocking the pattern of prophetic failure while simultaneously reaffirming community and ritual repetition. The structure here recalls patterns observed in more conventional millennial movements, where failed prophecy is not always discrediting, but can instead serve to consolidate belief through reinterpretation. In the case of the Church of the Subgenius, the failure is not only anticipated but central to the joke and to the fate. We should also situate the Church within a broader pattern of Western historicism. While often dismissed as parody, the Church's doctrinal complexity and symbolic density align with tendencies found in both Hermetic and Gnostic traditions, albeit transfigured through absurdist aesthetics. As noted in the occult world, Western historicism often embraces concealed knowledge, the valorization of the individual's spiritual insight, and the belief in an unseen reality behind the mundane. The Church's emphasis on hidden truths known only to the chosen subgenii, their cryptic slack, and the veil of false reality imposed by the conspiracy all reproduce these tropes in comic exaggeration. This inversion is not a rejection but a playful homage, one that both critiques and participates in esoteric tradition. So, the Church of the Subgenius is best understood not as a fringe anomaly, but as a product of a specific historical moment, a moment when mass media, postmodern cynicism, psychedelic spirituality, and disenchantment collided to produce a uniquely subversive spiritual parody. In mocking the forms of religion, it compels us to ask what makes religion real. In articulating absurd revelations, it forces us to confront the processes through which sacred narratives are constructed, transmitted, and sacralized. And in offering an ironic salvation through slack, it offers a sincere critique of capitalist time, Protestant work ethics, and the commodification of spirituality itself. The Church of the Subgenius is perhaps most compellingly analyzed through the lens of postmodernism, where satire becomes a mechanism not of pure mockery but of complex cultural critique. Let's address how the Church constructs its theological, ritualistic, and social discourse by strategically employing parody to undermine not only traditional religious authority, but also the pervasive commodification of belief in late capitalist society. The use of satire in the Church is not random irreverence. It is intentional, theoretically loaded, and deeply entangled with broader postmodern sensibilities. A key term in the Church's theology is slack, a notion that operates simultaneously as a sacred goal, a commodity, and a lifestyle. Slack is framed as the original birthright of all subgenii, stolen by the oppressive conspiracy of normal people, or pinks, who enforce work, seriousness, and conformity. The satirical brilliance of the concept lies in its fluid ambiguity. Slack is never quite defined, yet always positioned as that which has been lost and must be regained through spiritual awakening, or more accurately, through participation in the Church's esoteric ironic worldview. As Cusack notes, this rhetorical strategy allows the Church to position slack as both commodity and critique, mirroring the hollow promises of consumer capitalism while exposing their structural absurdity. The marketing aesthetic of the Church reinforces this critique. From the beginning, the Church has employed a highly stylized visual and rhetorical language that mimics advertising and televangelism. Bob himself is a pipe-smoking, clean-cut 1950s salesman, an embodiment of mid-century American commercial masculinity. This figure functions as both a deity and caricature, satirizing the corporate iconography that permeates contemporary religious broadcasting. As Partridge suggests, the Church engages in a form of hyperreal religion, wherein symbols are deliberately exaggerated to the point of absurdity, thereby highlighting the manufactured nature of all religious iconography in consumer culture. The Church's merchandising, t-shirts, books, videos, Slack-branded paraphernalia further collapses the boundary between sacrament and product, rendering religious participation indistinguishable from consumer engagement. This convergence of commodity and belief is not unique to the Church of the Subgenius, but reflects a broader trend identified by scholars of religion and culture. Bron Taylor, writing in the Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature, argues that many contemporary spiritual movements are shaped by the commodification of the sacred, particularly when belief systems are mediated through entertainment, tourism, and popular media. What distinguishes the church is its reflexivity. It knows that it is selling salvation, and it advertises this fact with brazen irony. The motto Act Now, Supplies Are Limited encapsulates this strategy perfectly. It is a parody of late night infomercials, yet it also functions as a theological imperative, an invitation to abandon the rat race and embrace the absurd. Such postmodern parody aligns the church with the work of Jean Baudrillard, particularly his concept of the simulacrum, a copy without an original, a symbol that refers only to other symbols rather than any fixed or transcendent referent. Bob is not a distortion of a real prophet. He is a prophet who exists only as distortion, as image, as simulation. The Church of the Subgenius thus produces what Baudrillard would call a hyperreality, in which the real and the fake are indistinguishable, and where religious belief itself is exposed as a kind of consumer spectacle. This is not a rejection of spirituality, but a radical engagement with it on postmodern terms. Eric Davis, in his treatment of the church in the occult world, observes that subgenius discourse operates within the tradition of the trickster gnosis, a form of spiritual expression rooted in transgression, ambiguity, and the overtuning of sacred conventions. Like the trickster figures found in mythology and shamanic cultures, Bob destabilizes dualities, mocks divine authority, and challenges followers to question not only religious doctrine, but the very structure of belief itself. Rituals within the church often involve performative absurdity, such as screaming at television screens, mock baptisms, or deliberately nonsensical sermons. These actions mirror conventional ritual forms but subvert their content, producing a dissonance that invites reflection rather than passive reverence. The church's parody is also sociologically potent. In the chapter of Re-enchanting the Word from the Handbook of Contemporary Paganism, Robert Paquette draws upon Max Weber's theory of disenchantment to argue that many new religious movements offer charismatic alternatives to the bureaucratization and rationalization of the sacred. The Church of the Subgenius takes this logic further, presenting a religion so saturated in charisma that it renders institutionalism impossible. There is no central dogma, no clerical authority, and no standardized theology. Instead, it invites its members to participate in a kind of chaotic post-structuralist play with myth and meaning. Its ambiguity is its strength. As Cusack argues, the church functions as a parody not only of organized religion, but also of the broader ideological systems that govern contemporary society, including politics, science, and capitalism. Finally, this satirical mode allows the church to escape many of the sociological tensions that often new religious movements face. Whereas groups like the Church of Scientology or Hare Krishna often provoke controversy due to claims of spiritual absolutism, the Church of the Subgenius avoids such scrutiny by embracing contradiction. As Partridge notes, the postmodern condition is one in which spiritual authority no longer derives from coherence or orthodoxy, but from the ability to subvert expectations and destabilize meta-narratives. The Church exemplifies this through its willingness to make belief itself the object of parody. In this sense, the Church of the Subgenius is not a negation of religion, but a radical form of religious expression uniquely suited to the late capitalist, media-saturated, and spiritually fragmented landscape of the postmodern West. It forces us to ask, what is left of religion when it is aware of its own artifice? And can parody, properly understood, be a vehicle for truth rather than its denial? In order to fully appreciate the cultural and religious significance of the Church of the Subgenius, it is essential to position it alongside other so-called invented religions, a category that includes Discordianism, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, Jediism, and Matrixism, among others. These movements share a critical posture toward institutional religion and dominant cultural narratives, yet they diverge significantly in their mythologies, rhetorical strategies, and degrees of engagement with satire, spirituality, and activism. Comparative analysis allows us to more clearly delineate the distinctive mechanisms through which the Church of the Subgenius constructs meaning, identity, and sacred play. Among the most closely related traditions is Discordianism, which precedes the Church of the Subgenius and is widely acknowledged as one of its spiritual forebears. Both movements elevate absurdity and contradiction to the level of religious principle, drawing inspiration from countercultural figures, chaos theory, and anarchic humor. Discordianism, founded in the late 1950s by Greg Hill and Carrie Wendell Thornley, venerates the Greek goddess Eris and asserts that order and disorder are illusions imposed on the primal chaos of the universe. Carol Cusack notes that Discordianism served as a cultural and theological template for later groups like the Church of the Subgenius, particularly in its use of humor, ontological subversion, and its challenge to the sacred seriousness that underpins much of Western religious tradition. However, while Discordianism embraces a more abstract philosophical framework of chaos, the Church of the Subgenius develops a more specific narrative and iconographic system centered on Bob, slack, and conspiracy. Another point of comparison is the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, which originated in 2005 as a protest against the teaching of intelligent design in American public schools. Its founder, Bobby Henderson, authored an open letter arguing that if intelligent design was to be taught as science, then so too should belief in the flying spaghetti monster. While originally a satirical intervention into public policy debates, the flying spaghetti monster evolved into a widespread phenomenon with a robust online following and institutional markers of religion, such as texts, the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, ordinations, and ceremonies. What Flying Spaghetti Monster shares with the Church of the Subgenius is a parody of the structural features of religion: sacred texts, creation myths, rituals, and even evangelism. However, Flying Spaghetti Monster is overtly atheist and polemical in tone, and offers no spiritual or metaphysical claims beyond its critique of religious privilege. In contrast, the Church of the Subgenius inhabits a more ambiguous terrain, in which satire coexists with a genuine metaphysical aesthetic, albeit one filtered through irony and chaos. Jediism, which emerged following the popular success of Star Wars, represents yet another kind of invented religion, one that eschews overt satire in favor of a more sincere appropriation of fictional cosmology for spiritual practice. Jedi adherents construct moral codes, meditative practice, and community networks inspired by the Jedi Order, depicted in the films. Unlike the Church of the Subgenius, which delights in absurdism and anti-authoritarianism, Jediism often seeks moral clarity, order, and personal development. Cusack observes that while both Jediism and Subgenuism are rooted in fictional media, their interpretative strategies differ. Jediism spiritualizes fiction, whereas the Church of the Subgenius fictionalizes spirituality. This inversion is critical in understanding their cultural reception. Judaism is often framed as sincere religion, while Subgenuism is regarded as parody, even though both involve the performance of belief. Matrixism, a more recent and lesser known movement inspired by the Matrix film trilogy, offers another instructive comparison. Founded in 2004, Matrixism draws on Gnostic motifs, simulated reality theory, and psychedelic mysticism. It positions the material world as an illusion and celebrates the use of entheogens as a means of accessing the real. Here, the Church of the Subgenius finds a curious resonance, not in doctrine or cosmology, but in its mutual fascination with the interplay between illusion and truth, simulation and authenticity. Christopher Partridge identifies this trend within what he calls occulture, a zone of cultural production where alternative spirituality, popular media, and esotericism blur together. While Matrixism leans more toward a sincere Gnostic mysticism, the Church of the Subgenius parodies the search for hidden truth even as it performs it. Furthermore, all of these movements emerge from and contribute to what Bron Taylor describes as a spiritual milieu marked by personal bricolage, media mediated experience, and a suspicion of religious authority. In the Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature, Taylor observes that many new religious formations are characterized by a deep ambivalence about institutionalized religion and instead value individual creativity, ecological awareness, and aesthetic innovation. The Church of the Subgenius, Discordianism, the Flying Spaghetti Monster, and others embody this shift, challenging traditional theological structures while offering alternative mythic frameworks, albeit with different degrees of irony, sincerity, and sociopolitical engagement. It is important to stress that these invented religions also differ significantly in their orientation toward community. The Church of the Subgenius is arguably the most performative and ritualistic of the group, holding regular gatherings such as X-Day celebrations, where members enact the eschatological myth in communal and often carnivalesque settings. Discordianism and Flying Spaghetti Monster, by contrast, tend to exist more as networks of discourse, emerging primarily through text and online forums rather than physical rituals. This marks a key difference in how sacred spaces are constructed. For the Church of the Subgenius, ritual parody is essential, while for others, engagement is largely textual or symbolic. Lastly, in terms of academic reception, Cusack insists that these invented religions must be taken seriously, not despite their parodic nature, but because of it. Their engagement with sacred forms, even when couched in irony, reflects a broader cultural negotiation of meaning, identity, and authority in a postmodern world. As such, comparing the Church of the Subgenius with its contemporaries reveals not only the diversity of contemporary spiritual expression, but also the evolving criteria by which we understand religion itself. While the Church of the Subgenius is often classified as an invented religion operating primarily through parody, a deeper reading reveals its embeddedness within esoteric traditions, psychedelic subcultures, and the wider cultural resistance to hegemonic rationalism and institutionalized religion. Let's explore now how the Church engages with occult discourse, entheogenic consciousness, and subversive spirituality, which positions it not only as a satire of religion, but as a participant in the longer historical trajectory of Western esotericism. One of the most salient features of the Church's discourse is its engagement with altered states of consciousness, chaos, and revelatory absurdity, all hallmarks of esoteric and psychedelic spirituality. Although the Church does not explicitly advocate for the use of entheogens in its ritual practice, its mythic landscape, apocalyptic vision, and surreal language resonate closely with the psychedelic churches and visionary traditions emerging in the same cultural period. As Greer outlines in his discussion of the psychedelic church movement, the 1960s and 1970s saw a flourishing of religious expressions that combined mystical experience, often induced by LSD and psilocybin, with heterodox mythologies and communal experimentation. These movements, including early iterations of Discordianism and the Church of the Subgenius, often adopted surrealistic and comic forms to express ineffable or altered realities, echoing the affective dynamic of visionary ritual. In this context, the Church's emphasis on chaos, irrationality, and disruption aligns with the magical strategies found in chaos magic and Discordian occultism. Colin Duggan, in his contribution to the occult world, characterizes chaos magic as a pragmatic, anti dogmatic form of ritual practice that privileges belief as a tool rather than a truth, and draws on bricolage, absurdity, and psychological inversion to create transformational experiences. This ethos mirrors the Church's own doctrine, wherein believers are invited to simultaneously believe everything and believe nothing, to engage in rituals that undermine themselves, and to adopt spiritual personas grounded in contradiction. The magical act in this model is not the assertion of power over reality, but the liberation of perception from habitual structures of meaning, an aim not dissimilar to that of psychedelic mysticism. Indeed, Eric Davis has argued that late 20th century occulture witnessed a merging of the sacred and ludic, in which humor, hallucination, and hermeticism intermingled to produce a trickster gnosis, a mode of spirituality rooted in the performance of ambiguity and rupture. The Church of the SubGenius exemplifies this tendency through its eschatological narratives of alien invasion, divine salesman prophets, and salvific slack. These motifs are not simply comedic, they echo archetypal forms found throughout esotericism, including the myth of the fallen world, the necessity of hidden knowledge, or gnosis, and the spiritual awakening of the elect. The irony is that these are presented in overtly ridiculous forms, thereby allowing practitioners to engage seriously with them while maintaining the critical distance afforded by satire. Moreover, the Church's aesthetic sensibility reflects its deep roots in countercultural artistic production, particularly the genres of science fiction, underground comics, and avant garde surrealism. As Tessel Bodwin notes in her study of occult themes in modern art, the surrealists, especially André Breton, were fascinated by the irrational, the symbolic, and the magical, and saw in absurdity a portal to deeper truths. The Church of the SubGenius inherits this aesthetic, drawing on graphic distortion, pulp iconography, and bricolaged text to produce a spiritual vernacular that is not bound by coherence but revels in fragmentation. These visual and rhetorical strategies can be understood as occultural tools, techniques designed to unsettle perception, disrupt consensus reality, and provoke spiritual insight through the dislocation of the ordinary. The Church's association with the counterculture also positions it within what Christopher Partridge terms the new spiritual environment of the West. This environment, as he argues, is shaped not by the decline of religion, but by the emergence of alternative spiritualities that re-enchant the world through popular culture, subcultural networks, and experimental practices. In this milieu, spirituality often expresses itself through irony, personal transformation, and resistance to institutional authority. The Church of the SubGenius thus operates as both critique and participant. It mocks religion while providing a space for symbolic enactment, community bonding, and metaphysical speculation. It ridicules transcendence while paradoxically performing it. The integration of countercultural and occult themes can also be seen in the Church's deployment of paranoia, conspiracy theory, and revelation. The myth of the conspiracy, an all encompassing force that suppresses slack and controls the masses, serves as a symbolic expression of the esoteric idea that the world is ruled by hidden powers and that salvation lies in uncovering secret knowledge. This resonates with themes found in both traditional Gnosticism and contemporary esoteric movements, where the initiate is awakened through contact with forbidden or concealed truths. Yet, in the Church of the Subgenius, these truths are gleefully incoherent, wrapped in jokes and absurdities that simultaneously point toward and away from the sacred. The resulting theological framework is one in which satire functions not to negate spirituality, but to destabilize fixed categories of belief and open up new possibilities for meaning. As Cusack aptly puts it, the satirical religion may be a signpost pointing to a spiritual truth rather than a dead end of mockery. This observation is crucial. When understood through the lens of esotericism and counterculture, the Church reveals itself as an initiatory system that teaches through disruption, a form of disenchanting enchantment that enables participants to navigate the spiritual wilderness of the late modern world with humor, skepticism, and symbolic play. The Church of the Subgenius has occupied an ambiguous and contested space within academic discourse on new religious movements and contemporary spirituality. While its use of irony, parody, and absurdity has led many to dismiss it as a joke or elaborate hoax, more nuanced scholarship reveals that its significance lies precisely in this ambiguity. The central tension for scholars concerns how to categorize the Church. Is it religion, satire, art, social critique, or some hybridized combination of all these elements? So now we explore the critical reception of the Church within religious studies, sociology, and the anthropology of the sacred, drawing on debates around legitimacy, performativity, and postmodern religiosity. A key contribution to the scholarly legitimization of the Church of the Subgenius is found in the work of Carol Cusack, who argues forcefully against the dismissal of invented religions as non-serious or inauthentic. Cusack critiques what she identifies as a residual essentialism in the academy, wherein religions are often judged by their perceived sincerity, longevity, or the depth of their metaphysical commitments. In contrast, she positions the Church of the Subgenius as part of a broader cultural shift in which individuals engage in creative myth-making as a means of negotiating identity, agency, and transcendence in an increasingly pluralistic and media-saturated world. She suggests that parody does not preclude belief, but rather provides a method for its performance and critical interrogation. This perspective aligns with broader theoretical development in the study of religion that emphasize religion as a category of cultural production rather than a fixed essence. As Brown Taylor notes in the Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature, many contemporary spiritualities challenge traditional religious categories by foregrounding immanence, ecological consciousness, and personal experience over institutional authority and doctrinal orthodoxy. The Church of the Subgenius, while not ecological in a narrow sense, participates in this same post-institutional trend and offers spiritual and existential commentary through humor and spectacle. The result is what some scholars have called a postmodern sacred, a mode of religiosity that is reflexive, ironic, and deeply entangled with popular culture. Partridge's work on occulture further supports this reframing. He contends that movements like the Church of the Subgenius exemplifies a broader reconfiguration of the sacred in which spiritual meaning is no longer confined to religious institutions but proliferates across the cultural margins in music, art, media, and parody. This diffusion, Partridge argues, should not be seen as secularization in the classic Weberian sense, but rather as a reenchantment of cultural life through alternative symbolic systems. The Church of the Subgenius, therefore, belongs to the new spiritual environment in which religious identity is performed and reimagined through bricolage, pastiche, and irony. The Church's reception has also provoked discussion around the politics of authenticity and legitimacy in the classification of religion. Scholars such as Sarah Pike have pointed out that the criteria used to determine what counts as a real religion are often implicitly shaped by Eurocentric, Protestant inflected notions of seriousness, institutional longevity, and moral authority. In this light, the Church of the Subgenius functions as a destabilizing force. It reveals the constructedness of religious categories by refusing to abide by the normative expectations. Its doctrines are ridiculous, its rituals ludicrous, and its theology incoherent by design. And yet, it has adherents who gather, practice, and find meaning in these very absurdities. The implication is clear. Belief, like ritual, can be performative rather than propositional. This performative quality of belief in the Church has been fruitfully theorized through the lens of ritual studies and performance theory. As Cusack notes, participation in church activities, whether chanting slogans, attending X-Day celebration, or purchasing salvation kits, constitutes a form of ritual engagement that is structurally analogous to traditional religious practice. These performances are not just ironic, they are deeply affective, bonding participants through shared language, symbols, and insider humor. Drawing on Victor Turner's concept of communitas, we can see how the subgenius community forms a liminal space in which normal social roles and hierarchies are suspended, and where the absurd becomes a medium for existential and social solidarity. However, the Church's ambiguity has also led to difficulties in research and classification. It resists ethnographic study in conventional terms because its members often adopt personas, pseudonyms, and parodic responses to scholarly inquiry. This can frustrate attempts at systematic analysis, particularly for researchers seeking to define clear theological or organizational parameters. But this evasiveness is itself meaningful. It is an enactment of the Church's core principle of resisting fixity, coherence, and orthodoxy. As noted by Partridge in the occult world, such groups often operate in the liminal zones of both culture and belief, challenging scholars to rethink their methodological assumptions. From a sociological standpoint, the Church also raises questions about the relationship between religion and social critique. Its exaggerated parody of American capitalism, Christian fundamentalism, and the self-help industry positions it within a lineage of oppositional spiritualities. Unlike traditional religions that often seek integration into the social order, the Church of the Subgenius operates as a parody of ideology itself. It reveals the ways in which belief systems, whether sacred or secular, are commodified, mediated, and deployed for control. In this sense, it aligns with what Partridge calls the cultural resistance strand of occulture, those forms of spirituality that function as critiques of mainstream values and institutions. In summary, academic responses to the Church of the Subgenius are divided not because of its content, but because of its form. Its ambiguity challenges scholars to expand their frameworks of what constitutes religion, belief, and ritual. Its satire is not the negation of religion, but its mutation into a postmodern idiom. One that reveals, perhaps more clearly than most, the absurdities, contradictions, and latent powers embedded in all sacred systems. As Cusack reminds us, parody can be profoundly spiritual, and invented religions deserve scholarly attention not despite their constructedness, but precisely because of it. As we conclude this exploration of the Church of the Subgenius, we return to the questions posed at the outset of this episode. Can parody be sacred? And what does the Church's hybridization of satire, esotericism, and counterculture reveal about the evolving nature of religion in contemporary society? Rather than resolving these questions with a definitive answer, the Church of the Subgenius invites us to sit with their ambiguity. Its enduring significance lies in precisely this refusal to conform to established categories of religion, spirituality, or even critique. The Church of the SubGenius performs a parody of religion that is paradoxically also a religion of parody. It inhabits the interstitial space between performance and belief, between sincerity and irony, between satire and sacrality. In doing so, it offers a form of postmodern religiosity that is not an empty mockery, but a self-reflexive commentary on the absurdities, contradictions, and longings embedded in both religious tradition and late capitalist culture. One of the Church's central contributions is its demonstration that belief need not be earnest to be powerful. As Cusack argues, the performance of belief, however ironic, can still fulfill many of the social, psychological, and existential functions of more traditional religious engagement. This complicates binary distinctions between real and fake religion, showing instead that religion is always in part performative, always constructed and always mediated through cultural forms. The Church's ironic rites, absurd cosmology, and apocalyptic mythos function not to delegitimize religion, but to interrogate how it operates and where it can be found. Moreover, as Partridge has demonstrated in his analysis of culture, we are living in an era where the boundaries of the sacred have been redrawn across the terrain of popular culture, subcultural expression, and individual bricolage. The Church of the SubGenius is one of the clearest manifestations of this shift. Its religious discourse is inseparable from consumer aesthetics, media simulation, and countercultural humor. Yet, rather than diluting spirituality, this fusion creates new pathways through which meaning can emerge. The sacred in the SubGenius universe is not beyond laughter, it is discovered within it. This collapse of boundaries also has political implications. The Church's central concept of slack offers a subversive challenge to the Protestant work ethic, neoliberal time discipline, and the moralization of productivity. In this sense, slack becomes a symbol of spiritual resistance, the right to be non-productive, to reject imposed meaning, to embrace absurdity in a world that demands seriousness. As Greer and Partridge both note in their respective analyses of psychedelic spirituality and reenchantment, such symbolic inversions are typical of countercultural religion, which often seeks not transcendence in the conventional sense, but a radical immanence, a disruption of the ordinary through the ecstatic, the humorous, or the entheogenic. While some may dismiss the Church as a cultural artifact of niche appeal or internet ephemera, its continued relevance lies in its function as a diagnostic tool. It illuminates the porous boundaries between religion and entertainment, between belief and identity performance. As Taylor suggests in the Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature, the emerging spiritual landscape of the 21st century is increasingly characterized by hybridity, irony, and reflexivity. The Church of the SubGenius is not an aberration within this landscape, it is a revealing exemplar. For religious studies scholars, then, the Church offers an opportunity not merely to document an unusual phenomenon, but to interrogate the assumptions underlying the study of religion itself. What counts as religion? Who gets to decide? How do humor, artifice, and simulation alter our understanding of the sacred? The Church of the SubGenius demonstrates that these questions are not peripheral, they are central to any contemporary understanding of religious life. To end our lecture, I encourage you to reflect critically on the ritualistic, aesthetic, and ideological dimension of the Church. Consider whether its irreverence may paradoxically offer a more honest engagement with the divine than many traditional systems. Consider whether absurdity might function as a kind of negative theology, revealing the limits of human language and conceptualization in the face of cosmic mystery. This is it for today's video, and these are my references. So, if you watched until this point, please leave me a telephone emoji. I don't know, I was just thinking about telemarketing, when people would call you to sell you something. So yes, leave me a telephone emoji so that I know that you watched until this point and that you are amazing, super committed to your learning. I'm so proud of you. And if you like my project of delivering free academic scholarship based on peer-reviewed research, please consider supporting my work via PayPal, Patreon, Coffee, super thanking me in the comments, checking out my services at drangelapuca.com. And you find all the ways to do so in bio, in the cards, in the info box, in the description, everywhere. So if you want to help out this project, you will easily find a way. So thank you so much for considering. And I really hope to see you in my Patreon community, because it's a fantastic community of like-minded, academically inclined, esoteric practitioners and or scholars. So you definitely don't want to miss out. And don't forget to sign up for my newsletter as well, because as I said, I always send updates there. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and activate the notification bell so that you won't miss new uploads from me. Also, let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode, whether you were familiar with the Church of the SubGenius, and whether this whole conversation, which I think, this video was particularly academic-y, let me know if this conversation has made you think or ponder over your own beliefs around religion, your own considerations around what constitutes a religion. I think that you can tell, perhaps by my personality, that I'm not a fan of seriousness. I don't think that you need to perform seriousness to be serious. I think that life is already very difficult, and I think my policy is just to try and infuse everything that I do, even and especially something that is serious, with fun. Because, why not? I mean, why not have fun? Even though some people may consider my work as less serious because of that, I've always been sure that people who get it, they will get it. And, there's nothing better than covering super serious stuff in a very fun and engaging and light way. So let me know what you think about it in the comments, and please share this video and any other video around so that the symposium can grow. I'm so happy that you've been here for this very long episode, and thank you so much for being here. I really hope that you stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now. Today we hold